You know, out of all the dungeons that I've done in Realm of the Mad God, none of them have stood out quite like the Snake Pit. Now, I don't know if it's maybe a nostalgia thing because it was one of the only dungeons that I could do back in the day, or speed was a good source of currency, or because it was just all around fun. Whatever the reason, to this day I still enjoy Snake Pits to a high degree. And finding one in Midlands fills me with a great amount of excitement. But what exactly is the Snake Pit? Well, that's what we're here to talk about. I'm going to tell you everything that there is to know about the Snake Pit, my own tips and strategies, and overall, why you should even consider entering this dungeon. Let's begin. However, I must warn you, just because it may look simple, doesn't mean that you shouldn't be careful about hidden dangers that might lurk right around the corner. Oh god! So, where should I begin when talking about the Snake Pit? I mean, it's a dungeon that I think almost everyone is familiar with. I feel like I would be beating a dead horse at this point. Then again, I guess that's what guide videos are all about, so I suppose I should start with where you can access the dungeon directly. Now, there are 5 enemies in the entire game that drop a snake pit. The Flayer God, the Lizard God, the Minotaur, the Undead Dwarf God, and the Ogre King. All of these enemies can be found in the Midlands, which is an area located right on the outskirts of Godlands. So it's still a fairly treacherous journey. I recommend you stay away until you're level 20, just to be safe. But once that green portal finally drops, you think to yourself, what is that? And then a voice goes off in your head and says,
"That, my son, is the Snake Pit."
Dad, is that you?
I gotta go.
And the first thing that I think of every time I enter the Snake Pit is Indiana Jones. Why exactly? Well, it's like exploring an ancient temple or ruins from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Also, snakes! Yeah, enough said. To be honest with you guys, I find the entire color scheme of the dungeon to be rather barren. It's not very pretty to look at. It's just the same brown tile being repeated over and over again. Other than that, it's just bland. Nothing more to say about that. Now, in terms of your progression through the dungeon itself, it's relatively simple. You get spawned in a room, and you have to make your way to the boss room by going through different pathways. Now, there can be multiple pathways in each and every room. If you pick the left pathway, that could take you straight to the boss room, and you could have an easy time. But there's a chance that the right pathway could take you on a joyride through the entire dungeon and leave you off at a dead end. Now, usually you can look on your minimap to make sure you're going in the general direction of the dungeon, but sometimes the game likes to throw you a loop, and the pathway pointing in the opposite direction of the boss room was actually the correct way to go. So, there's that. What's really unique to the Snake Pit, however, is that they aren't just open hallways. You actually have to blast your way through to the next room. There are destructible blocks lining each and every hallway. This allows you to make pathways for yourself that only you can fit through and prevent enemies from other rooms from getting you. Sure, it might not be much, but I like to make the most of the small things. But enough dungeon analysis. I don't want this video to go on longer than 10 minutes. It's gonna be longer than 10 minutes, isn't it? Let's move on to enemies. Throughout each and every room of the Snake Pit, you have a chance of stumbling on one of the following. Or 2 of the following. Or 3, you know what? It's a free-for-all. Pit snakes and pit vipers. Alright, these guys are everywhere. Lucky for you, they only have 5 HP each and only have 1 shot. Pit snakes only do 10 damage, and pit vipers only do 20. Unfortunately, they infinitely respawn through the vents in the ground, and they don't drop any XP, so fighting them is pretty pointless. I recommend you just bypass them, or clear them if you absolutely have to. Oh yeah, these guys. Pythons. They come in 3 different variations. Yellow, brown, and fire. No, not red. Fire. Now, while the pythons may appear different aesthetically, they're actually very similar in their function. They each have a bullet that does 25 damage. The yellow python has a long green bullet, the brown python has a short blue bullet, and the fire python has 3 red bullets. He's also the most aggressive of the bunch, which makes sense, since red is a color that's usually associated with aggression. All in all though, these guys only have 200 health apiece. There are no tactics necessary to take these guys down. Brute force is really all you need. You can afford to take the hits, and rest in each and every room if you have to regenerate some health lost in the battle. But don't stop firing. Since the enemies infinitely respawn through the vents in the ground, it would be wise to keep on shooting. And finally, we have greater pit snakes and greater pit vipers. These are the big guys of the dungeon, and are quite frankly the only enemies that should give you any real trouble. The reason being, they have 3 shots that each deal 50 damage. That's a 150 damage shotgun. A new player that walks into a room full of nothing but these guys is going to be absolutely terrified and definitely risks dying. Trust me, it's happened to me plenty times. The way I see it, there are 3 things a player can do in this scenario. The first course of action is to proceed into the next room, in which you begin circling in the opposite direction that the snakes are located, and continue to fire at them while dodging their own shots. It's a little bit riskier since you're right up close to the danger. That's why your second option is to retreat into the previous room and lure the snakes in one by one, while taking them out from afar. It's a lot safer, but it does slow your progression down a little bit, so it's not in your interest if you're trying to speed through. Your third and final method is to simply leave. If the challenge is proving to be too much for you, or you're stuck in a pinch, just Nexus and live to fight another day. Well, that about does it for enemies. Once you've cleared your way through all of the rooms, you finally embark on your epic quest to defeat the boss of the dungeon, Steno, the Snake Queen. Try saying that 3 times fast. Steno the Snake Queen, Steno the Snake Queen, Steno the Snake Queen. Oh, never mind, it's not that hard.
Hey, you lied to me.
But lucky for me, the boss fight is a lot more interesting to look at than the dungeon itself. Unfortunately, even at that, it's still not too captivating. Steno herself doesn't even move around that much to keep things interesting. She's very stationary and doesn't really move outside of her little box. What I do love about the boss fight, however, are these 4 barriers that surround the room. Now, the shape of these barriers is very important because there's a little wedge in each and every one of them that, say, a person of your size could fit inside. Let me elaborate. As soon as you get close enough to Steno, she starts moving around and summons 4 Steno pets that immediately begin circling around the room, pretty far away from her, but close to you. You can use these little wedges to hide and recuperate if you ever need to regenerate some health from taking a lot of hits. It was a nice little design element that I'm glad they threw in there because it gives new players a fair chance. However, what I like even more about that are the barriers that sometimes have destructible blocks around them, because by using these blocks, you can cut away a pathway for yourself that only you can get to and no enemies will be able to attack you. Because let's face it, there's always a chance that the pet could go past the barrier and start hurting you. But if you make your own little hidey hole, you can prevent the enemies from hurting you entirely, and you can rest there for as long as you need to. It's design elements like that that really link the player with the gameplay, and I think it's something that more boss fights need. I found myself using this technique a lot whenever I was newer, but I remember there being a lot more destructible blocks. Then again, this was around 2012, 2013, so my memory could be a little fuzzy. Heck, for all I know, they could have changed this in an update, but if that was the case, why? It's not really a problem for me, I'm just a little curious is all. Well, would you look at that? I caught myself analyzing again. It's almost been 10 minutes, hasn't it? Alright, let's do this. So Steno has 2 main forms. She has an in-between phase that I guess could count as a 3rd form, but all in all, she has 2 main phases that you really need to watch out for. Her first phase consists of throwing daggers in 4 different directions. Now, some key info here. Steno will only change direction whenever you move. So if she's firing in a direction that's keeping you safe, I recommend standing still, or at least not moving left or right. Doing that might mess up with her pattern, and she might change direction towards you, and you do not want these things to hit you, since they do 100 damage per shot. Any character that isn't a melee will be taking severe damage, and that's really something you want to avoid this early in the boss fight. Now, since you won't be able to move left or right very well, you're gonna have to rely on up and down movements, in order to keep you safe from the pets that keep on hurting you. Because I forgot to mention this, didn't I? The pets do 75 damage, and they'll slow you for 2 seconds, and a debuff like that is really something that you cannot afford to take. Now, ranged characters pretty much own the boss fight. They never have to get close enough to Steno to really be afraid. All they have to do is stay back and worry about the pets. Now, melees that use heavy armor are definitely more in the face of danger, but since they have a lot more depth than other classes, they can afford to take a few hits while being up real close. And since Steno's first phase isn't very long to begin with, it's worth it in my opinion to take a little bit of damage in order to dish out your own. Mid-range characters have it the worst. I'm mainly referring to the dagger classes. They have lower depth than melees, but lower range than robe classes. Now, lucky for them, they have speed on their side, so they can run up to Steno as close as a melee would, deal as much damage as they can, and if they're about to take some hits or they've already started taking damage, they can quickly run out and hide behind a pillar to recuperate. That's the best advice I can give you right now. If you have a better method, by all means, use it. Her next phase is where things get really scary. Very much like Oryx 1. She'll begin releasing several white bullets from her body. They each deal 60 damage, and they blind you for 1.4 seconds, putting you at risk for running into even more projectiles. Now, there are safe zones periodically placed around Steno, and standing there will prevent you from getting hurt by the white bullets. Unfortunately, Steno also has an AoE attack that she launches every couple seconds, and like the daggers, it also does 100 damage, so it's not in your best interest to take too many of these, or any of them. They specifically designed this boss fight so that way you couldn't just camp out right in front of her, so you have to always be on the move. Again, ranged characters will have no problem with this phase. Melees are going to have to stay on the move, all the while remaining within firing range. Now there is a way to get into the rhythm of it. Constantly running in a circle, I recommend using screen rotation for this. It's just all around more helpful. You can place yourself within those safe zones at the exact moment to where you won't get hit by them and you can safely move to the next slot. But I must warn you, it is very precise. I mean, I could barely get it for more than 2 rotations before I messed it up and got blinded. If it seems too frightening the first time, I recommend just staying out for this phase. You got all the time in the world, so it doesn't hurt to wait. Unless, you don't want that microwave burrito to get cold or something. In between these 2 phases, Steno has a, for lack of a better name, an in-between phase, in which she'll bob around like she did before, but this time, summoning enemies. She'll also throw out a few daggers, but nowhere near as many as her first phase. After that, she'll go back to phase 1. All in all, it's a pretty fair and reasonably challenging boss fight, especially for newcomers. Now, she only has 7,500 HP, but since she goes in and out of vulnerability, it can be a little difficult knowing when exactly to attack her, and when she'll actually take damage. Alright, I'm feeling dizzy, but there's no way that I can stop now, so I gotta truck through it. Let's catch my breath. Okay, there's one final thing about the snake pit that I have to talk about, and that's the treasure room. For those of you that don't know, and I'm suspecting that that's about 2 of you at this point, a treasure room, or a T room as it is abbreviated, is a specific area that has a chance of spawning somewhere within the dungeon. Now there can be up to 3 treasure rooms per dungeon, although I have heard some speculation about there being 4 and even 5. But even if that is true, it's a very rare event, so rare in fact it might just be a game glitch. Now I'm gonna say this right now, I love the idea of treasure rooms. The fact that they aren't a 100% guarantee means that it really is up to the player's perseverance to whether or not you find one. Yes, it could just be dumb luck whether or not you stumble upon one, but if you beat the boss of the dungeon and think, oh, I should probably go do some exploring to find that treasure room, it's all the more rewarding whenever you do, and it was a decision made by the player. It wasn't forced upon us. You don't have to do the treasure room, it's just an added bonus. And whenever you go out of your way to explore and go off the beaten path, it's always great to find hidden goodies. It's something that I look for in not just Realm, but in any video game. So yeah, my favorite part of the snake pit is the treasure room. And look at me, I'm analyzing again, but you know what? I don't care. I'm doing it. I'm going. You see this? The gloves are coming off. You can't see it, but the gloves are coming off. Trust me. As soon as you break a wall, you know whether or not the next room is a treasure room, because there's an iron grate that surrounds the perimeter of the tea room. There's also a few vents scattered about the ground, spawning various snakes and vipers, letting you know that it's not entirely safe in here, so tread with caution. The architecture of the room is also noticeably different from the others. You start off in this little box area that lets you know you've arrived, and then you go to a little narrow strip of hallway, which then branches off into a much wider and longer hallway. Along the side, you might see a couple of pillars. This reminds me a lot of walking down the red carpet. It's a long build-up to something rich and worthwhile. Once you finally make it to the end, you see this little square with an orange symbol on it. That is a switch. And first-timers aren't going to know what it does unless you touch it. And as soon as you do, oh god! Your heart will jump the first time that this happens. You just went from a room that had these tiny little itty-bitty snakes in it to this huge mini-boss. Also, booby-trapped arrows now start shooting from the walls. Now, they don't hurt very much, but they do cause bleeding, so they can take a reasonable chunk out of your life. And with a big mini-boss to deal with, that's not really something you want to have to worry about. You're up against a wall with your only exit surrounded by danger. You have to fight. But there's a lot of tension since you've probably never fought this guy before. You don't know how strong he is or how fast he is. Luckily, he isn't fast at all, which was a good idea. It would be rather cheap if a player got blindsided by an enemy that they didn't even know spawned. Now, the mini-boss, called the Snake Pit Guard, has 3 main attacks. His first mode of attacking is this V-shaped orange triple shot, which do 65 damage each. Not much later, he'll shoot out these 5 shuriken-shaped bullets that daze you for 2 seconds, which is a debuff that essentially cuts your rate of fire in half, maybe even to a quarter. If this happens, the fight will drag out longer than it needs to, adding to that tension that was already established from the moment that you walked in. And finally, as the fight progresses a little further, the guard will emit 3 large orange bullets, but they're slower than the previous shots, so if you could dodge them, you should be able to dodge these. They're more of a scare tactic than anything, since you're in an enclosed space and up against a wall. The guard's shots themselves aren't really that hard to dodge, it's more so the arrows than anything. But after a few rounds of just wailing on him and dodging some shots, he goes down and you can collect your rewards. That was something that I didn't mention in this video, the drops. That's mainly because all of the drops are pretty darn useless. The one thing that I can say is worthwhile in the snake pit is the snake oil. Think of it as a one-time use party effect. Upon consumption, characters within a certain area will all gain 100 health. It's a good method of keeping yourself in the fight longer, without needing to go hide and regenerate. Now, Steno and the Snake Pit Guard have the same exact drops. If you're soloing the dungeon, then you're guaranteed a speed potion, which is still a pretty fair drop to this day, considering not too many dungeons actually drop it. I'm looking at you, Wisdom. You do have a possibility of getting the snake skin items, but in all honesty, I couldn't care less about them. They're more poor man's vanity than anything. The best drop that you can get from the Snake Pit, though, is the Wand of the Bulwark from the White Bag. Now, on its own, Bulwark isn't really that great of an item, but it's definitely something that I consider to be true vanity, and I'm glad that I can say I have one in my possession. With that being said, dang it, the video is probably over 10 minutes by this point, but I did get to say everything that I wanted to. And at the end of the day, it's little things like that that keep me going. Well, that took a lot longer than expected, but this is my very first true dungeon guide video, so I was bound to cover some more general topics about dungeons as a whole. With that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. And don't forget to check out that next episode whenever I post it, which will probably be soon. The next time that we meet, I will be looking at the Undead Lair, so stay tuned for that. Alright. See ya.